Carter Karels, our old friend, is with us to talk a little bit of Texas A&M. He covers the Aggies for Gig'em 24/7. It feels, Carter, like we've been talking about this game forever at this point. It's like high-profile season openers. I don't know about you, but around here, we're all just ready for this game to get going.
Oh man, 100%. I mean, I looked at this game when I took this job February 23 because not only do I cover A&M, but I used to cover Notre Dame, so I've been
Right.
calling it my journalistic Super Bowl. So it's gonna be cool to see all my old pals from Notre Dame, and it's gonna be fun.
Does Texas A&M? I don't think they have Florida State on the schedule anytime in the near future. Another one of your stops over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no Florida State. They haven't met in any other sport that I can think of. But yeah, upcoming opponents are Notre Dame, and then I think after that it's Arizona State for a home and home. So no, unfortunately, no.
I'm sure you'll get to see Brian Kelly at some point down the road as well. So you've got that in your future, right?
Yep.
Well, let me just kind of start with this. We talked back, I guess, what's it been, like early summer, late spring, something like that. We talked a little bit about kind of where Texas A&M was coming out of spring practice and into the summer. What maybe was the biggest question that Mike Elko and the Aggies answered coming out of fall training camp?
Yeah, a couple things on the offensive side. I think Conner Weigman's health was kind of the question because in the spring, coming off of that, foot surgery, he wasn't himself. He wasn't 100%. He was still on the field practicing. Really did an admirable job just being out there, even though he couldn't quite plant that foot. And so that was kind of the big question: will he be 100%? And I think he got 100% probably in May or June. So no problems there. Looked a lot more like himself in preseason camp. On the defensive side, I think maybe the question was, how much better is this secondary going to be? And, a lot of new faces in the group, 10 newcomers, 7 of whom are transfers. And this group last season really struggled. And so, can this be a strength? Can it be at least not a weakness? And I think that they've had a lot of good competition in that group. I think if you ask them who would the starters be against Notre Dame, I think they may not even know the answer to that question yet. But from a depth perspective, there have been a lot of different guys pushed for the starting jobs there. Headlined by Bryce Anderson making the move from nickel to safety. I think he'll be the best player in that secondary. And at cornerback, you got guys like Will Lee, who started at Kansas State and has that experience. You got Des Ricks, who is a former 5-star recruit, transfer from Alabama. At nickel, you've got an experienced guy there in Tyreek Chappelle, who's making the move there from field cornerback. And so, I think last year really a struggle there. And I think this year, I don't think it's an elite group. I don't think it's full of all SEC guys, but it's not a glaring weakness. It's not going to be, a group that gets exposed a lot, especially with the defensive line helping them up front with the pass rush.
Sounds, at least, because I think that from up here with our perspective, since there are so many kind of unknowns, their secondary is probably the thing that that we've looked at where this is the potential weakness, especially with that defense. So it sounds like you're at least somewhat confident in their ability to be competent anyway, to not be as bad as they were last year.
Yeah, at least average, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the bar for this team is don't be getting burned constantly like you were last year when you played really good passing attacks. And, I think having what I think could very well be the best defensive line in the country is a big piece of that formula. I think it's going to make that group better. I think people were overselling or underselling just how big of a loss McKinley Jackson, Walter Nolan, and Edgerrin Cooper were in the sense of the stopping the run. I actually think we might see a little bit of a flip where this team was really good last year with stopping the run and that sort of thing, but they weren't good in the back end. This year, their coverage might be pretty decent, but stopping the run might have some issues. Replacing those three guys, up front, you're moving a smaller a guy in Shamar Turner, about 300 pounds from defensive end to D tackle. Albert Regis projects to start. It'll be his first time as a full-time starter. And then replacing Edgerrin Cooper, a consensus All-American at linebacker last year. I still don't know if they know who will be their replacement there at weak side linebacker. So, I'm not going to say that they're going to be better at defending the pass than the run. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying so much of the focus on the secondary, and I think there also should be focus on, hey, up front in the middle and replacing Edgerrin Cooper. That will be a challenge too, I think, for this unit. But overall, tons of confidence with the defense. It all starts with that pass rush that they've got and adding a guy like Nick Scorton, leading the Big Ten in sacks, and I think he's got a good chance to lead the SEC in sacks this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt, like when you look at defensive linemen who will be on the field Saturday night, Scorton is probably like the guy at the top of the list. And I'm talking about for both teams, like he's probably the best talent that's going to be on the field. And especially with everything that's happened with Notre Dame's offensive line, I think there's no doubt, like we're kind of looking at this like on both sides of the ball, like defensive line should be a strength for both teams. I am curious though to get like Notre Dame is going to go 10 or 11 deep, and in a game that like we were talking about the heat and all that kind of stuff before we started up this interview, and that's what I think people on both sides have been talking about. How deep is the Texas A&M defensive line? Like what's their ability to rotate? How deep do you expect that rotation to be in this game?
Very deep. Just to give you a sense, they've got a guy who led the MAC in sacks last year, Cassius Howell, and he's not even a starter for this team. And they've got 4 and 5 stars all across the defensive line who are not starters. Now, that doesn't mean that they're, living up to that potential of a 4 and 5 star, but, they have those traits and they have those things that you don't normally see from backups and third teamers. They got a guy in the transfer portal, Rodas Johnson from Wisconsin, who I think will be a good contributor there at defensive tackle. You got a number of guys you could point to at defensive end. They've got the UCF transfer Josh Selskar, who has some good experience. You got some guys who are entering their third year who were from that big 2022 class like Malik Silla, who could get a little bit more time. I just think, DJ Hicks is another guy to mention. I think if he's not a starter, he could be a really solid backup for this team. Former 5-star recruit from the 23 class, got a lot of playing time as a true freshman last year. People thought he'd be the starter, but it sounds like Albert Regis has kind of beat him out there. But we'll see, obviously, when it comes to this Saturday. But, yeah, I think they've got the potential to go 10 or 11 deep, just like Notre Dame. And, I think that, up front, you're always wanting to rotate on the defensive line, and they've got the flexibility to do it. What we've heard a lot is 3rd and long is going to be a down where you're going to see a lot of creativity from this front. You're going to see all different kinds of alignments and pressures. And, if we know anything about Mike Elko, it's that he likes to be creative on 3rd down. And
right.
I think that's the down to watch, where you could see a guy like Cassius Howell drop into coverage, or you could see 5 defensive linemen, and you could see, a ton of talented pass rushers, coming for Riley Leonard. So defensive line, not a big worry as far as depth or talent in pass rush. It's just stopping the run that will be the challenge for them after replacing a few guys.
Yeah, and I think that Notre Dame is looking at this, or at least some Notre Dame fans, like, is Notre Dame going to effectively be able to run the football, considering the newness, the inexperience, 6 combined starts on the offensive line. I think that there is a lot more concern than anyone probably would have been guessing even a month ago. But I'm curious, like, again, like your take, flip it to the other side of the ball from the Texas A&M perspective. What about A&M's offensive line? What is that a concern at all? Is it, especially going up against Notre Dame's defensive line with all the experience and again, depth that the Irish are going to be able to throw at them?
Yeah, it's funny. It feels like both teams have very similar strengths and weaknesses because, both feel very good about their defense. Both feel pretty good about their defensive line. It's the offense that has questions. It's the offensive line
Yeah.
that has questions. I think A&M feels fantastic about the left side of their offensive line. They got a 3-year starter at left tackle in Trey Zune. Really started to come into his own last year, and I think he could be a draft pick in 2025. Chase Basanis making the move from right guard to left guard, or right tackle to left guard. I think he's going to be the perfect fit there. He's somebody that's a freak in the weight room that, a couple of years from now, if he's a high draft pick, would not be surprised. So I think they feel great about their left side. It's the center and right tackle that's kind of got some questions. They had very poor center play last year in Bryce Foster, who went on to transfer to Kansas. And so that was a spot where they needed a new guy. And Mark Naboo was kind of the guy you thought would fill in that spot. Certainly had a little bit of experience playing there last year. But then they bring in a transfer from Utah. I'm going to butcher his name. Kolinu Feyu is what I believe it is. And had some experience at Utah, started the last 5 games of the season, but he only started because the starter got hurt. So he was the backup there. Is he good enough to start in the SEC? I don't know. I think Naboo is probably the better option there. However, it all kind of goes down to what A&M does at right tackle, because you thought that Reuben Fothery would be the surefire answer there. They kind of been moving it around, tinkering throughout preseason camp. Their projected starter at right guard, Armaj Reed Adams, a transfer from Kansas, he played right guard. He played right tackle. They kind of moved him around. And when he was at right tackle, they moved Naboo to right guard and had the Utah transfer at center. So kind of all depends what they do at right tackle. And I think that's why that side is more of a question for A&M, whereas the left side, it's cemented. You have 2 guys there who could be draft picks very soon, and 2 guys there that can really anchor that side of the defensive or the offensive line. So, yeah, really the right side for A&M.
So right side / in the middle, at least a little bit of questions. And again, like when you look at the matchup with Notre Dame, that's where Notre Dame has, a ton of experience with Howard Cross and Riley Mills and those kind of guys. So I'm just kind of talking this out loud for Notre Dame fans, to think about where some of these matchups are and stuff like that. And then, of course, on top of this is you've got Klein coming in as offensive coordinator. I don't know, what were you guys able to see much live stuff during camp? Like, what was that like? Like how much of his offense were you actually, kind of able to see in person? Get a feel for what it might look like, beyond just what you've seen from his Kansas State days, obviously.
Yeah, not a whole lot. I think the thing that people have been talking about, sort of the emphasis has been expanding the running game, having a lot of different ways to run the football, and being creative with that, and making it just more of an emphasis overall. I think that's something that when you look at Colin Klein's, time at Kansas State, running the football was their bread and butter. It was one of the best rushing attacks in college football. Now, do they have the O-line and the running backs to do that? I don't know. They're certainly not as good as what Kansas State had the last couple of years. And then you also see him run the quarterback a lot at Kansas State with Will Howard and Avery Johnson. Well, at A&M, Conner Weigman, not really a run-first guy, but definitely mobile. So that's one of the aspects we haven't been able to see in practice since the quarterbacks aren't live. But if you look at him, he's gained a little bit of a weight, and you just kind of get the sense that A&M may run the quarterback a little this season, which, after all the injuries they had the last few years, some people might say, I don't know about that. But I think they think of, hey, if we can just add one extra element in the offense and while keeping this guy safe, why not do it? Because I think you look at this offense and there's not a ton of star power at the skill positions. Not a lot of proven guys. No one who's had a 1,000-yard receiving season. No one who's had a 1,000-yard rushing season. So I think that this is not going to be an offense that is highly explosive and throwing the ball all around the field and having 40-yard gain after 40-yard gain. I think you're going to see more of an offense that methodically moves the ball down the field, stays ahead of the chains and doesn't get into, third and long, has more of a third and manageable, tries to limit turnovers, tries to limit penalties, and just tries to be that efficient third down offense that has these long extended drives to give their defense a rest and kind of grind out these games. We saw Notre Dame kind of had a similar style a few years ago with Ian Book being the plus game manager for them. I think that might be the plan here. Maybe if you look back at some of the A&M teams in 2020 and 2021, that's kind of what they did. They weren't this explosive offense. They methodically drove it down the field, and then their defense took care of the rest, and the offense took care of the football. So I think that's going to be what you kind of see. Conner Weigman so far, he's only thrown 2 career interceptions through 8 starts versus 16 touchdowns. So he's somebody that's not careless with the football and can do that sort of offensive style. So I think that's what you'll probably see from them.
Well, and I guess, he's someone who feels like there's a lot. I realize he was a highly regarded recruit and all that kind of stuff, a 5-star recruit going down there. But, as you mentioned, he doesn't have a whole lot of game experience. The experience he has, the numbers have looked pretty good. Is the hype, I guess, around Weigman justified at this point, or in your mind, does he still kind of have something to prove? Like you talked about the injury, even beyond the injury, is there more that he has to prove, especially in a kind of a high profile, high exposure game like he's going to play this Saturday night?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think, is the hype warranted? I think it is, because when he has played, he's been very impressive, and he's, checked off all the boxes you want to see, and certainly has the pedigree as a 5-star recruit. And drafts are all about projections and projecting where you think a guy will be. So the thought is not, hey, today would he be drafted first in the first round? It's hey, after having a big season, he'd be drafted first. So I think it makes sense. At the same time, though, you're totally right. He does have to prove it. He's got to do it across a full season. As a true freshman, he didn't begin the season as the starter. I think that was probably a mistake on Jimbo Fisher's part. And I think, Conner Weigman won't admit that, but I think he probably thinks that he should have been the starter. And, they bring him in, and what does he do? He has an incredible game against Ole Miss, and he has an incredible game against LSU and leads them to a top 5 win and Kyle Field and spoiling LSU's playoff hopes. And then last year, before he went down with the injury, now didn't do very good against Auburn, but every other game he had to, look pretty good. And from a metric standpoint, from a PFF standpoint, he graded as one of the better quarterbacks in the country up to that point. The sample size is certainly the thing you could point to. Hey, it's only been 8 starts. Let's see him through a whole season. Let's see him versus all of the top defenses. It's not like Miami had this super elite defense. New Mexico didn't, right? So that's one thing. I think what you like about the guy is he takes care of the football. He avoids sacks. He extends plays with his feet. You know, he's one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the country when he played last year. And yet the guy barely got sacked. He didn't go down. He extended plays, threw his receivers open. Maybe the next step for him, not just staying healthy, but maybe, you know, having more of a deep ball and better timing with his deep ball is sort of the thing that I've looked at last year, where there were times where he'd throw a little bit late. There'd be times where, you know, he didn't quite get it on time. And certainly missing the spring and well, not missing, but being limited in the spring, I think could maybe hinder your progress and maybe makes it a little bit more rusty for you. So that will be the thing, is can he be on the right page with his receivers and build that chemistry with them where, you know, on those deeper passes where the window's so thin, he's delivering it at the right time. He's got the arm strength, got all the skills. It's just a matter of doing it game after game and being consistent with it.
Well, I saw the comments you had a week or so ago about the timing with his receivers, and I know you said, you know, small sample size, what you guys had been able to see, but is that, especially on the offense, like is that maybe one of the bigger questions that they have, exactly what they're going to get out of that group of receivers that they've got?
Yeah, I think really all the skill positions for A&M, there's a question mark. And, you know, with receivers, the two questions are, one, it is a group that has dropped a lot of passes in camp and even last season. You know, guys like Ja'Day Walker had issues with drops. Cyrus Allen from Louisiana Tech had issues with it. And then I think, you know, do they have a number one receiver? Mike Elko said on Monday they do, and that would be Noah Thomas. And he certainly has all the makings. He's 6'6". He can come down with all the 50-50 balls. He has pretty good chemistry with Conner Weigman from the games we've seen of them together. But he's had injury issues ever since high school. It's been a problem for him staying on the field. He played quite a few games last year, but he was hurt the entire season. Broke his pinky toe preseason camp, had an abdominal injury that he was dealing with all season. And, I mean, that guy was nowhere close to being healthy. So it was kind of hard to judge him on that, you know, on that scale. But they feel like he's the number one receiver. If there's anybody to really show up, I think it'd be him. Ja'Day Walker's another guy who, at the end of last season, he really started to take over as the number two receiver behind Aniyah Smith. Evan Stewart kind of faded in the background, while Ja'Day had, you know, probably 300 or 400 yards in the last 6 games, and really started to take a step forward. Transferred from Grand Valley State, so last year was quite a bit of a transition for him. And so year 2, can he take an even bigger step? I think he can, but I don't know if he's a number one receiver, whereas I think Noah Thomas would be that guy for them.
Interesting. A lot of talk, of course, about the Mike Elko, Riley Leonard connection in this game, and I'm curious, again, from someone who sits there, like what impact you think that ultimately has in this game.
Yeah, it's funny. Mike Elko's, we asked about him, and he was like, "Yeah, it's interesting. It's weird. I don't want to do it." You could tell the mutual respect between those two,
right,
is high, and you know, you could argue that without each other, they wouldn't be where they are right now. You know?
Yeah, true.
Elko, Riley Leonard had a big reason in him having the success he did at Duke and getting this job, and with Elko, certainly had a big impact on Riley Leonard doing what he did. Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting. You could look at it, you know, Riley Leonard's going to know more about Mike Elko's defense than most college quarterbacks that Elko will face. But Elko is going to know more about Leonard than most coaches that Leonard will face. So both of them have their kind of own advantages. I tend to think that Elko will have the advantage because, he's the coach. He's the one calling the schemes. He's the one who's knows his strengths and weaknesses. Whereas Leonard, you think about it, right? When you're practicing during the season, you're not really going against your defense. You're going against the scout team defense that's sort of emulating what the opponent is going to be. So I don't know if it's totally fair to say like, oh, Riley Leonard went against Elko's defense every week, because really he's going against Louisville's defense. He's going against Florida State's defense. So I think that might be the one key distinction to make, and it's why I think Elko has the advantage over him. Now, is it a sizable advantage? I don't know. I tend to think, though, that I also think another advantage that Elko could have is, hey, he played Notre Dame last year. He saw what Mitchell Evans can do. He saw what Jaden Greathouse can do. He got to see this team up close. Now, some of those guys are gone, but a lot of the key guys on defense are back. And so I think that could be another added benefit for him.
So if you boil this thing down, do you think it's which quarterback plays better, which offensive line plays better, or something else that this game comes down to Saturday?
Yeah, the trenches will definitely play a big role in things. I think it might just be which offense does better, because we know both defenses are phenomenal. I think with Notre Dame, their offense looking better would look like their offensive line being better than people think, and
right.
being not looking like a team that has only 6 combined starts among their starting offensive line. That's how they win the games. It looks better than anticipated. A&M, I think it comes down to their skill positions. Can one of their receivers get 100 yards and really show up? Can Le'Veon Moss have a really impactful day on the ground? And if it's wet conditions, can he have, almost 100 yards on the ground? And then certainly A&M's defensive line will play a big role. If your defensive line gets 5 sacks in a game, it really doesn't matter what anyone else does. Like take it over up front, nothing else really matters, and that could certainly be in play for this Aggie defensive line. So I think it could all start with them for sure.
Carter Karels from Gig'em 24/7, covering Texas A&M football down there in College Station. Like you mentioned, he used to cover Notre Dame football recruiting back in the day. Not in the not too distant past. What, about 4 or 5 years ago? It's been something like that. Does that sound right?
Yep. Not long ago enough to where I remember covering Jack Kaiser. I remember covering Riley Mills and Howard Cross. I covered a lot of those guys on that team. So I'm trying to get together with Jack's dad actually this weekend. So, still have some relationships over there, and it's going to be great to see some people from Notre Dame.
It helps when Notre Dame has guys who have been here for 8 years, it feels like.
I know Jack Kaiser, he might be older than I am. My goodness.
I know. If he grew that beard out, like yours, that's all he needs at this point. All right. Well, enjoy the game Saturday, Carter. Appreciate you doing this. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sean.